The wind had a mean edge that evening. It came down from the ridges, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Inside her cabin, Martha Lane stirred the stew and listened to the creaks in the roof, each one familiar, each one part of the life she'd built out of quiet and survival. Then came the knock. Not a timid one, not curious. It was the kind of knock made by someone who knew the weight of his own hand and didn't care to hide it. For a long moment, she didn't move. The ladle rested in her hand, steam curling up into her face. The fire popped, sending sparks into the dim air. She told herself it was a traveler, a ranch hand lost in the storm, but something inside her already knew better. When she opened the door, the wind barged in first, flinging snow and smoke around the room. And behind it, there he was, Cale Ryder, older now. Harder, maybe. The stubble was gray at the jaw, the lines at his eyes carved deep as canyon cracks. His hat dripped from the melting snow, and his voice, when it came, was low and rough. "Evenin', Martha." Her name on his tongue hit her like a memory she didn't want. She didn't invite him in right away. She just looked at him, her hand still on the latch. The silence between them was the same one that had followed her all these years, ever since he'd called her foolish in front of half the town and rode away without looking back. "What brings you down from the mountains, Cale?" she asked finally. He shifted, eyes avoiding hers. "Storm caught me up. Thought I'd find a roof. Till it passes." Her gaze dropped to the boots, mud and frost. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his hands raw from cold. For a heartbeat she saw the man he used to be, the one who'd taught her to ride, who'd carved her initials into the old pine down by the river. But she also saw the one who'd left her standing in the dust, with everyone watching. She stepped aside just enough to let him through. "Close the door then. Heat don't keep itself." He did, grateful but too proud to show it. The cabin was small, one room and a lean-to, the fire the only light. He stood near it, letting the warmth crawl back into his fingers. "You've done well for yourself," he said, eyes scanning the shelves, the mended curtains, the row of jars she'd filled through summer. "Didn't figure you'd still be here." "I didn't figure you'd ever come back," she replied. That drew a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess we both misjudged something." Martha ladled stew into a tin bowl and set it down near him. "Eat. Talking makes no sense on an empty stomach." He took the bowl, hesitant. "You don't owe me kindness." "I know," she said simply. "But it's cold, and I'm not heartless." For a while there was only the sound of spoons scraping tin and the wind clawing at the walls. Martha sat across from him, the lamplight drawing gold into her auburn hair. She studied him quietly, noting the tremor in his hand, the way he glanced toward the window like a man not used to staying still. She remembered the last thing he'd said to her before he left. "You're a fool, Martha. Love don't fix a man like me." And now, here he was, shivering, half-broken, sitting in the very warmth he once turned away from. When he looked up, she met his eyes and spoke softly, without bitterness. "You called me a fool for loving you," she said. "But you still want shelter." The words hung between them, heavy and unhurried. The fire snapped, the lamp flickered, and outside, the storm grew louder, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Cale didn't answer. He couldn't, but the way his shoulders sank, the way his eyes lowered, it was enough. Martha leaned back, calm and steady. Somewhere beneath the wind and the ache, she felt something loosen, a knot she hadn't realized she'd carried for years. The storm could rage all night. It didn't matter. Inside that cabin, she finally had the upper hand, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel foolish at all. The storm didn't let up through the night. Wind howled down the chimney like an old ghost that couldn't let go of its story. The cabin walls shuddered under the weight of it, but the fire inside held strong, steady, like Martha Lane herself. Cale Ryder sat close to the hearth, hat off, head bent low. Steam rose from his coat where the snow melted off, leaving dark stains on the floorboards. He hadn't spoken in a while, and Martha hadn't asked him to. Silence had become its own kind of language between them, safe, predictable, and sharp around the edges. She poured coffee into a tin mug, the smell mixing with the faint scent of pine smoke and wet leather. "Here," she said, setting it down beside him. He nodded, wrapping his hands around the cup. His fingers were rough, cracked from the cold, but there was something careful about the way he held it. like he was afraid the warmth might slip away. Martha went back to her chair by the window. The lamp beside her cast a soft glow across the room, catching the shine of her needle as she mended a torn sleeve. Outside, Snow pushed against the glass, whispering in long, lonely breaths. She could feel his eyes on her. "Didn't think you'd still sew by lamplight," he said finally. Her lips curved just a little. "Didn't think you'd remember." Cale smiled faintly, a man unsure whether he had the right to. "Hard to forget the woman who fixed half my shirts and cursed me through the rest. Hard to forget the man who tore them all to begin with," she replied, eyes still on her stitches. He chuckled low, the sound warm but weighted. Then the quiet returned. In truth, Martha didn't know what to do with him sitting there. Years had passed since that day in town when he called her foolish, when pride cut deeper than any knife. She'd thought she'd buried the feeling under work and routine, but seeing him again, the sound of his boots on her floor, it all stirred up what she'd once promised herself to forget. Cale set the mug down, looking toward the fire. "I heard about your folks," he said softly. "Didn't know till long after." She nodded, not looking up. "Wasn't much to know. They're gone. The land's mine now. You kept it," he said, almost to himself. "Guess you always did know how to hold on." Martha's needle paused mid-air. She felt something in his tone. Regret, maybe, or just the ache of someone who'd finally run out of things to lose. "You look tired, Cale," she said. "How long you been out there?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Too long. Tried working up near the ridge. Thought maybe the quiet had fixed something in me. Did it?" He shook his head, eyes on the fire. "Quiet don't fix a man. It just makes him hear the parts he don't like." That made her look at him, really look. The man sitting before her wasn't the same reckless cowboy she'd once known. There was humility now, threaded through the weariness. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. "You could have gone anywhere," she said softly. "Why here?" Cale hesitated. "Guess I wanted to see if you were still here." Her heart gave a single traitorous beat, but she kept her face calm. "Well, you've seen. Eat, rest, and when the road clears, you can ride on." He met her gaze then, and the silence stretched. "You want me gone that bad?" She set down the needle, folding her hands in her lap. "Want's got nothing to do with it. I just learned what happens when a woman mistakes pity for peace." The fire cracked, and for a moment neither spoke. Cale leaned back, shoulders heavy. "You think I came here for pity?" "I think you came here because there's nowhere else left," she said quietly. Her words hung in the room like smoke. Harsh, maybe, but true. Cale looked into the fire for a long time. Then finally he nodded. "Maybe you're right." Martha turned back to her mending, the lamplight trembling slightly as the wind rattled the window. But inside, something in her chest eased. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first small breath of it. Outside, the storm began to fade. Inside, two people sat in the half-light, both trying to remember what warmth felt like and whether they deserved it. Morning came slow, gray, and heavy. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside blank and still. A pale light crept through the cabin window, settling on the table where two tin cups sat side by side, last night's coffee gone cold. Martha woke before dawn, as she always did. Habit had a way of keeping her steady, even when her thoughts wandered places they shouldn't. She moved quietly, stoking the fire, setting the kettle on. Behind her, the faint sound of Cale shifting on the cot broke the silence. "Didn't mean to sleep so long," he muttered, voice rough with morning. "You needed it," she said, not looking at him. Storm took its toll. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "You still rise before the sun, I see." "Someone has to keep the day moving," she replied. It was small talk, but it carried weight. Years of distance condensed into simple sentences. He stood, walked to the door, and looked out through the frost. The land stretched white and endless, the fence half buried in snow. "Forgot how quiet it gets after a storm," he said. "Quiet's not the same as peace," Martha answered softly. Cale turned toward her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You always did have a way of turning a phrase." She gave him a look. Not sharp, but not fond either. "Words are cheaper than they used to be, Cale. Learned that the hard way." He nodded, accepting it without defense. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the low whistle of the kettle. Martha poured him a cup of coffee and set it down near his hand. "You still take it black?" He blinked, surprised she remembered. Yeah, guess I do. Her hands paused over the second cup. Guess I do. It sounded so much like the man she once loved, simple, thoughtless, but honest. She felt a pang she didn't care to name. He blew across the surface of the coffee and spoke into the steam. You ever think about leaving this place? Starting over somewhere else? She shook her head. This land's all I've got. My father built the fence, my mother planted the trees. Feels wrong to let it die alone. Cale looked toward the window again. You've kept it better than most men could. That's because I had to, she said, her voice calm but firm. Necessity makes better ranchers than pride ever will. He smiled at that, real, unguarded. You were never weak, Martha. I just didn't see it then. She met his eyes, searching for the mockery she used to expect, but there was none. Only a quiet kind of sorrow. Too late for seeing, isn't it? She asked. Maybe, he said, but not too late for remembering. The words sat between them, warm as the fire. Martha stood and reached for her shawl. I need to check the fence line before the snow hardens. If you plan to stay a bit, you can bring in the wood from the shed. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. That drew a faint smile from her, small but real. Don't ma'am me, Cale Ryder. Makes me feel like a preacher's wife. He laughed softly, the sound startlingly familiar. Can't imagine anyone taming you into that. She turned toward the door. Good. Keep it that way. The air outside bit at her skin, but it was clean and alive. She walked through the snow, boots sinking deep, breath visible in the cold morning. From the open doorway she could hear Cale moving around, stacking wood, muttering to himself. It felt strangely domestic, almost peaceful. As she bent to lift a fallen branch, she caught herself thinking about the old days, the laughter, the long rides, the promise of things that never happened. Then she straightened, pushed the thought away, and looked up at the ridge where the sun was beginning to rise. Inside the cabin, Cale watched her from the window. He didn't call out, didn't move, just watched her silhouette against the pale sky and thought about all the ways he'd been wrong. The silence between them wasn't cruel anymore. It was careful, like two people relearning the rhythm of breath, one moment at a time. And though neither said it aloud, both felt it in the quiet. The storm had passed, but something far more dangerous had begun. By the time the thaw came, the valley had changed its color. Snow melted into the cracks of the earth, and thin rivers of brown water carved their way toward the creek. Martha Lane hung her washing on the line, listening to the rhythmic creak of the clothespins in the wind. The air still bit at her fingers, but the sun, finally, felt like a promise. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Cale stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd spent the morning mending the hinge on the barn gate, the same one she'd been cursing at for months. Gate's fixed, he said. Should hold through spring. Martha didn't turn. You always were better at fixing things than keeping them. He froze for a heartbeat, long enough for her to regret it, but she didn't take it back. The wind carried her words away, fluttering the edge of a white sheet like a flag of uneasy truce. I suppose I deserved that, he said quietly. She glanced at him then, hat off, eyes soft, that look of a man learning to live with what he'd broken. Maybe, she said, but I didn't say it for revenge. Cale gave a slow nod. Then why? Because I don't trust silence anymore, she said. It hides too much. He studied her face for a long moment. Martha, what do you want me to say? That depends, she replied, hanging another shirt on the line. Are you saying it to ease your guilt or to change something? He didn't answer right away. The two of them stood there, surrounded by the sounds of dripping snow and restless wind. It felt almost peaceful, if peace could ache. Finally he said, I was wrong. About you. About what I thought love was. Martha's hand stilled on the clothespin. The word love landed between them like a forgotten relic. She looked down at her hands, at the soap stains, the lines carved by work and weather. I don't need pretty words, Cale, she said softly. They don't keep a roof from leaking. I ain't talking pretty, he said, voice rough. Just true. She turned to face him fully now. Then tell me this, why'd you go? Not the story you told others. The real one, he swallowed, jaw tightening. Because you made me feel small. Not your fault. Mine. I didn't know how to be loved without earning it first. Martha stared at him, the sting of memory dulling into a kind of tired understanding. And now? He exhaled. Now I'd give anything to go back and not be that man. For a moment. She almost reached for him. Almost. But years of learning her own strength stopped her hand. "You can't change the past, Cale," she said quietly. "All you can do is stand in it and not lie." He nodded, and there it was, the faintest trace of peace on his weathered face. From down the road came the clatter of a wagon. A rider slowed near the fence, tipping his hat. "Morning, Miss Lane. Heard you got company." His tone carried that sharp curiosity small towns never lost. Martha's shoulders stiffened. "Mornin', Sheriff," she said, polite but distant. The sheriff looked from her to Cale, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You all right out here?" "She's fine," Cale said, stepping forward. "I can speak for myself," Martha said quickly. The sheriff gave her a nod, tugged his reins, and moved on, leaving behind a wake of stirred dust and suspicion. As his silhouette faded, Martha sighed. "That'll be talk by sundown." "Let 'em talk," Cale said. "You don't know this town," she replied. "They'll turn charity into scandal before the night's out." He looked at her, that old protectiveness flickering to life. "Then I'll leave." She met his gaze steadily. "You think running fixes anything?" "No," he said, voice low. "But staying might hurt you." Martha looked past him toward the horizon, thin gold light catching on the snowmelt. "Maybe hurt's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me." For a long while, neither spoke. The day carried on around them, wind through laundry, the soft groan of wood, a bird testing its first song of spring. When Martha finally turned back to the cabin, her voice was calm, steady. "Come inside, Cale. Supper won't cook itself." He followed, wordless. And though the town would indeed whisper by sundown, inside that cabin there was only the quiet sound of two lives beginning, awkwardly, to learn how to share the same fire again. Spring came slow that year, as if the land itself didn't quite trust warmth yet. Days stretched longer, the creek thawed into motion, and tiny yellow flowers began to push through the mud around Martha Lane's cabin. Cale Ryder stayed. Not because she asked him to, Martha would never ask, but because the place itself held him still. Each morning he found a chore undone, a board to mend, a trail to clear. By the time he noticed, days had turned to weeks, and the silence between them had softened into something almost comfortable. That morning, he stood near the corral, hammer in hand, fixing the last of the fence rails. Martha was by the porch, sweeping dust from the boards that would only gather again tomorrow. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. "You know," he called out, "I think this place might finally forgive me for stepping on it." She leaned on her broom. "The land forgives quicker than people do," Cale grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "You telling me there's hope, then?" She gave him a long look, half stern, half amused. "For the land? Maybe," he laughed under his breath, but he felt that truth settle somewhere deep. She wasn't cruel, just honest. Always had been. Inside, Martha set the broom aside and began kneading dough for supper biscuits. Her hands worked steady, rhythm born of habit, yet her thoughts wandered toward the man outside. How easily he fit into the rhythm of her days now. She hated that it felt natural. Comfort was dangerous. It made a woman forget the cost of being disappointed. When he stepped inside, the sunlight came with him, cutting through the dim of the cabin. "Fence is done," he said. "You can stop worrying about the cattle you don't have." "Good," she replied. "Now we can both rest from work we didn't need to do." He chuckled, setting his tools by the door. "You always did have a sharp tongue." "It's the only weapon I've got left," she said. But her tone carried warmth now, a quiet teasing that surprised them both. They ate by the fire that evening, not speaking much. The world outside glowed gold through the window, and the hum of crickets crept into the silence. After a while, Cale said softly, "I went into town yesterday." Martha looked up, startled. "You what?" He nodded. "Had to pick up nails and salt. Folks looked at me like a ghost crawled out of the hills. Word travels fast in small places," she murmured. He hesitated, then added, "They said things. About me. About you." "I'm sure they did. I told them they didn't know a damn thing about you." Her eyes softened, though she tried to hide it. "Defending me doesn't change what they think." "No," he said quietly. "But maybe it changes what I think of myself." That silenced her. The fire snapped. She watched him, the lamplight catching the gray in his hair, the lines carved deep from years of running. He looked older, yes, but also lighter. as if putting his shame into words had eased the load. Martha rose to refill their coffee. "You don't owe me redemption, Cale, just honesty." He met her gaze. "Then here's honesty. I'd stay if you let me. Not out of pity. Not for forgiveness. Just because this feels like something worth standing still for." Her hands stilled around the pot. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she said softly, "You can stay if you understand what that means." "What does it mean?" "That I won't build my life around anyone again. You help when you can, you go when you must. But you don't make promises you can't keep." He nodded, his throat tight. "Fair enough." Martha handed him the cup, her fingers brushing his for just a second. "Then we understand each other." Outside, the last of the daylight faded into a calm twilight. The valley shimmered under its new green. Inside, two weary souls sat close to the same fire, neither claiming victory, neither asking for miracles. Cale looked toward her, voice low. "You ever think maybe second chances don't come from luck, but from people willing to offer warmth when they shouldn't?" Martha smiled faintly, eyes on the flame. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just two fools learning not to call kindness weakness." The fire burned lower, but the room stayed warm. And when the wind brushed against the cabin walls, it sounded less like loneliness and more like the sigh of a world quietly forgiving itself.